Hey, welcome back to the channel. It is time of that week, everybody. You're very familiar with it. Those very few of you who watch these videos, but it's time for another 1,000 word short story inspired by a piece of artwork. I seem to be stuck in this theme. You'll see what I'm talking about, but it's kind of like people kind of hanging out, going about their day. I don't know. I need to get out of this rut, I think. I need to find some artwork that maybe has a little bit more action in it. I don't know, or something that is in a completely different genre. Maybe I should delve into sci-fi or fantasy next. But the title of this episode doesn't seem familiar. That's because it's taglog. It is a taglog for Fisherman. And so this story takes place in the Philippines, presumably. It is done by a Filipino artist, so I figured I would listen to the soundtrack of probably my favorite movie that takes place in the Philippines, and that's called Metro Manila by Robin Foster. Fantastic movie. If you have not seen it, please go watch it. It's one of those movies that I put off for far too long. I wondered why Netflix was telling me why I would love it so much. And then, indeed, I did love that film, so go watch it. So come with me to venture to the far southeast, and let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Mangingsida, which translates to The Fisherman, and is by an artist named Alban Tan from Davao, Philippines. I think what I love about this piece is the focal point. We have this view beneath a bunch of just dilapidated docks, and we're looking out at this lone fisherman who is flinging a net out into the water, and there is a sun just creating him almost in silhouette. And this is a great example of how to create a focal point. There's obviously tons of different ways to do it, but what really stood out to me here was the emptiness of everything. He's up early. There's trash everywhere. I particularly, again, love the focal point or the positioning of the camera here, because this would be so easy to just put above the docks. You see the horizon and all its glory. You see the people milling about the docks maybe, or maybe nobody's up yet. Either way, you get a sense of just population, right? But here, everything feels very lonely. It feels very apocalyptic almost. I'm not sure if that was the intention of the artist, but that is the feeling I got from this. Just everything in disarray, things falling apart. And it's almost as if, somebody who is lurking beneath this dock is spying on this lone fisherman. So Alban, thank you so much for the inspiring artwork. I look forward to discovering the story here. So that said, let's see what I came up with. Danilo woke to the song of the crickets and the light of the moon, cocooned in his plastic tarp blanket, which had a hole bigger than the one in his belly. He shivered at the sounds it made as he hugged it around himself against a fist of wind that had ridden off the sea from a place he just might go someday. Not today, though. The world had ended, and there was still so much to do. He coughed a cobweb of phlegm onto his hand and rolled the strands between his fingers, then in the dirt when they wouldn't come off. A cricket chirped beside him on the cardboard mat where someone had slept once. For a moment he thought it might be her, born into a simpler body for a simpler life, because she deserved better. What he deserved was breakfast. He placed his hand flat on the cardboard mat. Veins strode over tendons and swerved around calluses, only to be severed by a deep scar that marked the end of his hand. He wondered where the blood went. Maybe it had all escaped from the wound, and he was a zombie who didn't know it yet. Danilo whistled to the cricket through the gaps in his teeth, of which there were many. Not a harmonica by any stretch, but it did create a semblance of a melody that the cricket answered. He was a fat one, the cricket. Plump thorax with eyes like jelly beans. Danilo gnashed his teeth, imagining those legs crunching on his molars, the squish of juices rolling around his tongue so every taste bud got a nip. Then a swallow to channel the flotsam down the river of his gullet. Danilo's hand twitched. The cricket chirped. It perched on his knuckle, eyes no longer jelly beans, but pebbles, smoothed by the sea. Fish swarmed above those stones, silver scales reflecting the trickling sun rays like gemstones. "Sorry, my love," Danilo said and clapped his other hand over the cricket. He transferred it to a styrofoam cup and fastened the lid. After gathering his nets, poles, and tackle boxes, because more than one of anything was always useful, he padded out into the dawn. On the way to the docks, he plucked a few worms waking from the soil to give the cricket company. The dock swayed like the palms used to. Those trees stood bare now, matchsticks that hadn't burned to their roots. The sea brought another wind to flick strings tied to one of those matchstick trees. The strings rose and brought the remains of a hammock, which flapped as if to say hello, before dropping dead again to hide in the grass. Other things were dead in the grass too. Big hands and little ones, with curled fingers, reached above the blades and stalks, and he wondered why he didn't feel anything. He looked the way he had come, no footprints to mark that he had ever walked the path. Not a zombie, a ghost. Danilo felt bad for not feeling a thing, so he moved on. The docks were a trap of their own, splinters and nails frozen in an explosion, the only things to keep them together. That and the ropes, still decorated with the festival banners, all shriveled now, like him. His stomach grumbled, and he jumped, landing on one of those splinters, perhaps a nail too. No pain came from the blood pooling from beneath his toes, purple and black. This brought tears to his eyes. He dabbed them on his tongue. They did not taste like the sea. Danilo climbed under the dock where he kept his boat among pallets, cardboard and bloated garbage bags, so no one would find it but him, in case there was anyone to find it. So far, no one had. His boat rocked on the black water, trapped between two dock posts and camouflaged with a tarp not unlike the one that barely kept him warm. He flung it off and stepped onto the boat. By now the clouds had retreated from the sun, which squatted on the horizon. "I'm tired too," Danilo said. A message he didn't know he was to deliver. It was true, though. His shoulders and hands nodded as he prepared the vessel, using the oar to push away debris. They were persistent today, the bags heavier, the pallets stubborn, with their legs locked in the water. He managed to clear a path and guide the boat out from under the dock, where he had to shield his eyes from the sun. He laughed as the sun embraced him. The hole in his belly laughed too. A family of water lilies swam up to greet him, but he knew water lilies didn't grow in the ocean. He decided that's what they were anyway, keeping them at the edge of his vision to not ruin the illusion. Danilo bent to retrieve the styrofoam cup and coughed up a handful of muck, which he covered with his foot. He wiped his mouth. "Teamwork, eh?" The worm had crawled up the side of the cup with a cricket, riding its head, its barbed legs firmly planted on the wall. "All right," he said. "All right." He put the cup down and fetched his net along with his straw hat because the sun was tired no longer. A deep breath cooled his lungs but did nothing to snuff the fire in his belly. He sighed. He did not look back the way he had come, and tossed the net into the air while the crickets chirped and the worms writhed and the water lilies gathered closely to keep his boat steady in the wind. Danilo thought he should say something, give thanks to the bounty he would catch and the life he still possessed, to hear the songs of the nights and see the brushstrokes of the mornings. But there was no one to listen, and there was so much to do. Welcome to The Interviewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about, well, you know, where I try to justify my decisions in the story and try to defend it as a story that was worth your time. Sometimes it is, I think. Sometimes it's not. This one I feel like has, again, a good skeleton of a story. There's some things I wanted to emphasize here, but we will get into it right now when we talk about the writing. So what was this story about? Well, something about the picture reminded me of the end of the world, and I mentioned that when I was talking about the artwork, and so I went with that. I imagined this guy named Danilo, who is a lone fisherman, just going about his day. Everything is crumbled, the world is destroyed, yet his days, for the most part, have not changed. He still gets up early, he goes fishing, and he's going to do that until he finally dies, because he doesn't really know anything else. And I always thought that was an interesting concept, right? When everything is stripped away and you have this individual who is just going about their daily routine day in and day out, and there's kind of a just loneliness and a hopelessness and something that's just interesting to me about that prospect, right? Like, why do you keep going on if there's nothing to go on for? And that is what I was trying to convey with this story, just sort of a day in the life, in which when I was writing this, it was very much day in the life for a long time. And I stopped and I said, look, with the 500 word count mark, I need to turn the scene to some degree. And so I need to figure out what the hell this guy's doing, why he's doing it. What is the hook here other than him just going about his day fishing? And at first I thought maybe I should leave it at just that. Like maybe that is what sort of emphasizes the mood or the message or theme or whatever you want to call it that I was trying to get across. But I changed it. I went back and peppered some things throughout that are kind of hinting at his own end. And I don't know if I don't think I successfully conveyed that 100%. There's a lot of more connective things I could create here. I think some more meaning to the things he's saying and the things he's doing. But anyway, let us go through this thing. Starting at the top, I first started this line, honestly, with the world had ended and there was still so much to do. And I may go back and make that the first line. I'm not quite sure because it is kind of a hook. It gets your attention immediately. But instead, I always try to start with the character because I want the person to visualize this person immediately. I want them to connect in terms of like, you know, who's in the scene, where are they, and so on and so forth. And so that's what I went back. And you'll notice in a lot of my stories that I start with the name of the character because I think you need to start with the character as soon as possible. Otherwise, it feels so disconnected. I think it's okay if you're trying to do, like I always call it the movie approach, where you're dipping the camera down into the scene. I do it myself plenty of times. I think there's valid reasons to do that, but sometimes I just like to start with a character, and so I did. And so we start with Danilo here, and he's waking up to the sound of crickets, and he's wrapping himself in this plastic tarp blanket. And this is what I added later, which had a hole bigger than the one in his belly. So again, I think that could be strengthened up a bit. That was me, the first hint at him being injured, something wrong. I feel like people could take that as a metaphor, not something that's literal. So I should probably clean that back up. But rather than having that end of the world line as the first line, I made it to the last line of the paragraph because I think that's another good technique too, you know, you're bringing somebody into the scene with a character, but then you hammer them with that final line in the paragraph. It's kind of a different technique I use sometimes to just, you think everything's okay. You see this guy sitting here, he's wrapping himself in a blanket, and then this hits you and you're like, okay, this is different. I will continue reading. At least I hope so. This was another element I added as well. He's coughing up phlegm in his hand to just show his sickness. But again, I think having a connection between his sickness and maybe his memories and maybe metaphorically some of the other things in the scene, like the sun or these insects or different things like that, I think that's really going to help bring it together. And I introduced a cricket here, and he immediately starts to think of this woman. I don't know if it's his wife. I don't know if it's, you know, it could be a daughter even, just someone he cared about. And he's imagining her being reincarnated in this thing. But then I end it with what he deserved was breakfast. And I was thinking he wanted to eat this cricket, right? So you may think after reading this or listening to it that he wants this as bait, is which he actually does use it for. But I wanted him to at first think about eating it just to kind of demonstrate the fact that times are lean, right? Food is not abundant. And so he puts his hand down to let this cricket crawl upon it, or maybe, you know, he's going to try to catch this thing. And I demonstrate that he's got a very gnarled, injured hand, or well, was once injured. And I start to like describe him a little bit more. He's missing some teeth. He's trying to play his teeth like a harmonica. He continues to stare at this cricket, who's very fat and plump, and it makes him hungry. I describe, you know, jelly bean eyes, and he's imagining what it's like to eat this thing. But then, to his surprise, the cricket has crawled on his knuckle, so it is not afraid whatsoever. And he says, "Sorry, my love." Again, I think I could probably tighten that up, make that a little more interesting, but it's him sort of apologizing to this woman, this girl that, you know, he had an affection for, who he thought maybe was reincarnated into this cricket. And he picks up this cricket and stuffs it into the styrofoam cup. And he heads on. He picks up some worms to keep the cricket company. But again, we know it's more bait. He's going fishing to the docks. And this is another element where I was bringing in more of the end of the world stuff, talking about the palm trees being like matchsticks and then the remains of a hammock blowing up. But there are other things dead in the grass too. And this is me introducing some of the bodies, the hands of not only little ones, but adults. And he's kind of contemplating on his own existence here to a degree. But he back then he talked about himself being a zombie. But now when he sees no footprints on the path behind him, he calls himself a ghost. And this is sort of when he's starting to feel a little bit numb, right? He's almost detached from this world. Like he's almost a ghost. He's almost a zombie at this point. He feels bad about it, but he feels bad about not feeling bad about what he's seeing. He's almost becoming acclimated to this terrible place. But then he finds his boat. It's underneath this dock, right? Where what you're seeing in the picture here, the artwork here, this is when I'm trying to bring the camera, bringing the scene down to what you're seeing here, taking him into that sunset or sunrise, and no one has found it. He goes down there every time. He hides it away even though he hasn't seen anybody. And this just emphasizes again that he is utterly alone. And some more personification of the sun, which he mirrors with, I'm tired too. A message he didn't know he was to deliver. It was true though. And I start to just emphasize the fact that he's worn out, he's weathered, he's exhausted, he's tired of this life and this day-to-day routine he goes through, even though it's really all he knows. And I saw these things that looked like water lilies, but he could be on a river, right? He could totally be on a river, but I just imagined him on the coast near an ocean. And so that is what I decided to make these things. And he's just kind of not hallucinating, but imagining. He's enjoying the picture of water lilies, even though he knows they don't grow in the ocean. At least I don't think they grow in the ocean. I'm pretty sure they're only fresh water. But he decides to keep that illusion for himself. He doesn't mind that it's sort of a fiction. And again, we have him coughing up more stuff. And I think, again, there's these elements that are signifying something is wrong with him, but they don't really add up to much. I feel like it needs to build up toward the end, right? To where the reader knows what's going on. They know he has this inevitable end, but I don't think it really quite got there. And so he notices the worm and the cricket trying to escape the cup, and he puts them down and gives them, this is another time I think I could have emphasized more character with him. I was pretty boring. All right. A lot to infer, I think, which could have been stronger. And in these final two paragraphs, I have him, he doesn't look back the way he had come and tossed the net into the air while the crickets chirped and the worms writhed and the water lilies gathered closely to keep his boat steady in the wind. So it's almost just symbolic of him, not thinking he's going to go back, right? Because when he was on the path, he looked back to see his footprints and didn't see anything. And it's almost just his anchor, I guess, back to home, back to where he's going to go to. But this time he did not look back. And this final paragraph is somewhat hopeful, somewhat sad, because he thought he should say something. He should give thanks to the bounty he would catch and the life he still possessed, to hear the songs of the nights and see the brushstrokes of the mornings. But there was no one to listen, and there was so much to do. So I don't know. I think really what I was trying to do here is there's a guy who is in this rut, a lifetime of routine. And what happens when everything is stripped away? What happens when there's no reason to continue, right? What do? He does all that he knows how to do, and that is get up every morning and go fishing. And I always think that's an interesting concept too, because, a lot of people, I feel like my dad to a degree is like that. He worked his entire life doing more or less the same job, and he retired and he's just like, I don't know what to do. So he doesn't really do anything. And I think a lot of people are like that, right? They're so used to this routine, decades and decades and decades, and you take that away and there's nothing left. And so what this guy does is, he didn't retire obviously, but he just goes about his day because it's all he knows. And there's something interesting about that. And I think it relates to, like I said, a lot of people we may know. Editing Jason cutting in here because while I was editing this video, it got me thinking about the story. And I know I mentioned that I wanted to change it. I wanted to make him the one who's dying, kind of this bittersweet, tragic ending. But while I was listening to myself talk and cutting things up, I realized I don't want to do that. I want it to be a guy who has hope despite all the odds. And so I think that's the way I'm going to rewrite this, is that show just all of the destruction, all of the terrible things, and all of the reasons why he should just kill himself. He has no reason to go on, but then he finds hope in the end, regardless, maybe about his routine. Maybe he has some kind of value in that. I don't know. But I thought I would keep the rest of the video intact just so you could see the process of just how you can think one way and then just completely flip over the other way. And that's great. That's what's great about storytelling, is I think you have that flexibility. It's really easy to change stuff. I think so many people abandon stories or give up before it's done, when I think that everything is salvageable to a degree. You just need to give it enough time. Sometimes you got to let it sit. Sometimes you got to talk through it. And I think me recording these videos really helps me, and hopefully helps you in the same way, by talking it out, right? Just talking it through, vocalizing your thoughts, even writing them down in a notebook sometimes really helps me just come to solutions. So anyway, back to the video. Yes, there are some things to fix, but again, I think there's a skeleton of a story there. This is not a bad first draft. I could totally work with this and fix it up, add a little bit more punch to it. And sometimes the story just spills out and everything kind of falls into place. But this time, I think there's something there again, right? But it's going to definitely improve with a second pass. So thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for watching, and keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else. Promise. Thanks again.